Hi Bonni, welcome to Utopística, a web discussion series produced by Jesus T. Piñero here at Universidad del Este in Puerto Rico. It is such an honor to have you here in my program. Let's start the discussion, but first I want to congratulate you for your podcast, Teaching in Higher Ed, which for those who don't know, this is a weekly podcast where Dr. Stachowiak explores the art and science of being more effective at facilitated learning. She also shares ways to increase personal productivity so we can have more peace in our lives and even more presence for our students. A total of 120 episodes have been aired so far, Bonni, and it's such a milestone. I want to start with this question: how this experience has helped you to grow professionally and personally?
Let me start by saying what an honor it is to be talking to you. It's great. It's very rewarding to get to talk to other people who have a heart and a mind to want to become better all the time at teaching. And it's an honor to get to talk to so many people who I just think are magnificent teachers, and they speak to me every day when I'm in my own classrooms teaching, and when I run into challenging situations, they are echoing in my head and encouraging me and challenging me all at the same time.
That's great, Bonni. When did you start your podcast? It's 120 episodes so far, so it was like 2 years maybe?
June of 2014.
2014. And why a podcast?
Well, it started with my husband began a leadership podcast. It's called Coaching for Leaders, and his is more broadly to anyone in business and nonprofits, in educational settings, but more on the administration side. And he knew the passion that I have for teaching. And I'm not always able to meet people at my own institution who want to sit at lunchtime and talk about nothing but teaching. There's many people who love their discipline, but not as many who just have such a love for teaching. And he suggested it and said that at the time there really weren't that targeted of conversations happening. And I didn't believe him for a while. And then it turned out that at that time he was right. And so I decided to go for it.
Yeah, I think your podcast, one of the first one to be out there about teaching in higher education.
Yes, and some have come and gone because it does take a considerable amount of discipline and work and candidly expense to put something like this on. You would know it from your show as well. If you're going to do it consistently, it's a challenge, but one that I really enjoy.
Yeah. What kind of topics or things do you usually cover in your podcast? I know that there is like 3 or 2 big themes: technology, productivity, personal knowledge management. But could you please tell us a little bit about the different topics that have been discussed or in the program?
Broadly speaking, I've always wanted to stay focused on teaching, and there are some great research podcasts out there for people who want to learn more about different kinds of research. One is called Research in Action, and that one's by Katie Linder, Dr. Katie Linder at Oregon State University. And I never wanted to branch out that much. To me, it's about the teaching focus, and there also is a focus on productivity, because as we are teaching, I am of the mind that we really do need to have that discipline for planning and thinking deeply about what we're doing and reflecting. And we can't really do that kind of deep reflection if we aren't intentional about it. So that's why I have the productivity aspect in there. And to me, that comes from then being able to be more present for the students I'm so pleased to be able to serve.
That's great. How can professors, can we increase our productivity so we can have, as you say, more peace in our lives and even more present for our students? How can we increase that? We have very busy schedules and many things to do. So how can we be more productive in this so complicated world?
Mm-hmm. One of the things I find helpful for me is to separate the doing from the being. This probably sounds a little bit silly, but they just came out with a new thing on our Apple Watches that remind us to breathe. Some people remember to breathe in their lives, but for me, I get this little notice that says, It's time for some quiet. It's time to just be. Because I think so many of us are just running and trying to do all of the time. And the other thing that I think we get trapped into sometimes is doing what is someone else's priority. Doing because someone else didn't plan for something, and creates a sense of urgency that then becomes a sense of urgency for us. And especially because we communicate so much by email, we can wind up never really thinking about our own mission, our own sense of vocation, and instead just responding to all the student queries that come that are more transactional and not as relational. And the relational is really what fuels us as professors to become good mentors. And to me, that's a food for me that nourishes me. And sometimes the emails, I forgot this, I didn't do that, that's where we get kind of losing sight of what our real purpose is and what we do.
As one of the tools you mentioned, I think Inbox Zero, or I think that's that is very good to manage our email. So once we receive an email, we don't have time to respond. That is not so important, so we postpone it like in 1 week or a couple of days. So that's one of the things I like about your podcast. A lot of the tech tools you mentioned. I love technology. I always include technology in my classroom. And speaking about tech tools, you have mentioned in your podcast a lot of tech tools. What kind of tech tools are the most important or the basic ones a teacher needs to know and start testing so they can be more effective? The basic ones.
To me, it isn't necessarily, and you didn't ask for this, but it isn't necessarily about naming a product, but to me, it's about the purpose of the tool. And there are a few purposes that have become important to me, but that doesn't mean we have to use what we normally think of as technology. We can use even index cards or sticky notes. I have a few posts on my blog where I talk about a few different lesson plans that I've done entirely just around teaching with sticky notes. And index cards work great. Stephen Brookfield is someone who talks a lot about teaching using just something as simple as an index card and getting feedback from students in that way. For me, I like to always know my students' names. My goal is by week 3 to know all my students' names. And I typically teach anywhere from 120 to 150 students in a semester. So if I'm going to do that, I like to have that in my phone where I can constantly be quizzing myself. So I do use a tool called Attendance 2, but there are lots of really good attendance type tools that you can include photos for your students. That's just the one that I know well. Another really big thing that's important to me in my teaching is what's called retrieval practice. And retrieval practice is the idea and the research that looks at, instead of us trying to put more and more and more information into our students' heads, that the time that we spend together in the classroom can be used more effectively to help them retrieve what's in their head. And sometimes cognitive scientists justifiably so get nervous when we compare the brain to a muscle, because they say it doesn't really work like a muscle. But I still like that analogy in the sense of working it. I tell my students, if we aren't thinking hard and really having to challenge our brains to pull the information out, then I have not done my job. So there are a number of retrieval practice tools that I like. I like Pull Everywhere. It has a free version that you can get up to 40 students in each class. I mean, so 40 times however many classes, you can just reset the polls and you can ask questions, and lots of different kinds of questions, like multiple choice questions. You could have open-ended questions. You've probably seen those word clouds before. And the word that is used more frequently becomes larger, and that can be really helpful to not have students just memorizing definitions, but to try to get more to the meaning behind things and being able to apply them. So that's a tool that I like a lot, but I use a lot of actually different tools for retrieval practice. Another really fun one is a game that you play on your iPad or your tablet. and you hold it over your head.
I'm going to try it tomorrow, thanks to you.
It has the word up there or phrase, and the students try to get you to say that word without you knowing what it is. And if they get it, then you put your hands down. And if they pass, then you put it behind your head. And that's a really fun one, but I like to mix it up and never have it be predictable, because otherwise students who maybe one way didn't resonate with them as much as another way, then they get a lot of different ways to learn that. I wanted to also mention there's a wonderful website called retrievalpractice.org, where there's a whole bunch of research that's all in one place and can talk to you more about how this method of teaching works.
That's great. Also, when people enroll at your weekly podcast, for receiving news, they will receive like a newsletter where it contains like 10 or 20 of the best tech tools. Exactly, right?
Yes. So if people go to teachinginhighered.com/subscribe, or even if they just go to the website, then they can receive a weekly email with the show notes from each podcast. And then in that same email, an article that I've written about teaching or productivity. But as you say, the first time that you sign up, you receive the Ed Tech Essentials, that's educational technology essentials, 19 tools. 19 tools.
19
tools. Yeah.
And you mentioned one of the tech tools, the one is there is an app from Ellen, Heads Up. Thanks to you for that suggestion. I'm going to try it tomorrow in my class, so I will let you know how it works.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to it.
Yeah. So again, now in technology, if there is a new professor who usually do not include a lot of technology in the classroom, what kind of recommendation can you give to them?
To me, it's less about the technology and more about the approach. So I would first want to find out if their aversion isn't really to technology, but it's really to pulling down this wall between them and their students. So I would want to observe their classes and see how much of the time are they talking and how much of the time are students talking. We can get, as academics, we can get so caught up in the debate about technology and how it's ruining the world and no one can pay attention anymore and we can't think and we're so distracted. And I actually think we are too distracted. So it's not like I don't think there's valid points to that. But so that's the first thing to me is the teaching, because there are analog tools. There's index cards, sticky notes, having them go to the whiteboard and draw some things there. I mean, there's all these different ways that we can bring the wall down, that we can stop having the concern about technology. Because I find a lot of times people are concerned that it's not going to work.
Exactly.
It's not going to work. So I think, well, then try it in your department meetings. Try it with just a small group of students. If you teach and students are struggling in the class, have them come to your office, just 3 of them, and do a review session and try out something like Poll Everywhere in just a really small way. I will also say that there is a tool called Plickers. That's Plickers. And it's a pretty easy entry point because it is both analog. The students hold up these cards and they can be held 4 different ways depending on what is at the top of the card. Okay. They hold them, and it's a way of asking multiple choice questions. And then you as the instructor, take your phone and you scan everybody's through their app, and it happens very, very fast. And this is a good way for students then to have their phones away, because yes, they can be distracting. I still use them, but we like to change it up. And they can stay focused on that. The other really big teaching technique that has been shown to be highly effective, especially it's used in STEM teaching, is the idea of peer instruction. So if I was using Plickers and I thought the answer was B, then I'm going to hold it a certain way. Then the teacher can scan everybody's answers and then say, talk to the person sitting next to you.
Okay.
See if they also thought the same answer as you, and then see if you can come together to does your answer change now, or do you still stay the same? And time after time, the answers get better after they have a chance to talk to the person next to them.
Great advice, Bonni. Now, another topic that you usually cover in your podcast is personal knowledge management. What does exactly that mean, and how can we improve our personal knowledge management?
I really like the definition from Jarkey, and Jarkey is an expert in personal knowledge management. He lives up in Canada and offers workshops pretty regularly online. And he defines personal knowledge management as a way that we can go and seek out information.
Mm-hmm.
We can make sense of it, and then we can share it with others. Mm-hmm. One of the big challenges that I find when I start to introduce people to the idea of managing their knowledge is they think, well, when I need it, I'll just go find it. It's so easy, Google today, whenever I need that information, I'll go find it. I did start a couple of years ago, my first teaching of doctoral students. And it's always hard for me to see, how would you not see, this is a writing project you're going to do for 2 years. It's not like it's going to work very well to just, today I'll just go look for whatever it is I need today. We need a way of making sense of our research, of our teaching, of our lives. And that's what this process does. So we have to have these filters or funnels or ways of information going and seeking it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why tools like Twitter can be so helpful. People who say, oh, Twitter, I just don't like it. Well, who are you following? How did you, what, because that's what makes it, is whoever it is that you're feeding yourself information from. Mm-hmm. And same things with what are called RSS readers. That's real simple syndication. So I can go and subscribe to different blogs and they come into one place for me. Mm-hmm. So that's the seeking. And then the sensing, I need some kind of a giant virtual file cabinet. And the problem with my file cabinets when I was much younger, I would never go back and look at them. In fact, I still have one file cabinet upstairs. I don't think we have lived here, 6 years where we are now. I've never looked in those things, right? But I regularly look in my digital file cabinet. In fact, I was just meeting with some students yesterday. They're not my students. They're some of our communication students. They want to start a podcast.
Oh.
I said, and they said, we know from listening to your podcast and listening to your husband's podcast, we never really thought about music. How do we put music into our podcast? And I could go, and they didn't know what Creative Commons was. And so I explained to them Creative Commons, but I could share, here's my bookmarks that I have saved of different Creative Commons places where you can get music that you can legally use. And it's just so fun. Anytime I talk about a topic that is interesting to me, I have this rich set of resources I can share. Mm-hmm. And then as far as sharing, that's sometimes where people really get concerned about, gosh, I don't know that I have anything to say. And you can lurk for a little while, you can seek and sense, and then you can start to share more as a curator. So I'm sharing what Jarkey had to say about personal knowledge management. I don't feel confident yet that I have something to say. And that can be the first step. And then you might start to feel a little bit more confident that you really do have something to offer to the community.
That's great. That's a strategy applying one of my classes, that is to curate content, but positive content. We are surrounded with a lot of negative news and information. So we started this, it's like a website where students create positive content that is from different sources around the world, not only here in Puerto Rico. So it's another way for them to start their personal knowledge management. So that's great. Thanks to you for that suggestion. Now, about the podcast, 120 episodes, what was the most challenging episode you have recorded so far, and the most enlightening?
This one I probably didn't want to answer. And I know it's a cop-out because it's so difficult, but I'll just go with one. I'll say, instead of the one, I'll say a one. This is one that kept challenging me, and that is Ken Bein. Ken Bein came on and talked about his work, and if people are not familiar, he did a longitudinal study about what the best college teachers do. And then he shared that in a book, and now he does a lot of consulting, and a lot of other work has come out of his first piece there. And I was so honored to have him on the show, and he challenged me really for two reasons. One reason is that he talks a lot about our classes should be less about telling people content, teaching content, and more about asking important questions. And in fact, he even says the word beautiful in there, that we should be getting people to think about important, beautiful, meaningful questions. And that's something that I still feel like I'm not as good as I would like to be. I think I still feel this pull toward the content and, oh, what if I don't talk about this, and what that might mean, versus centering back. So he continues to challenge me, even though that was episode 36. And as you said, we're over 120 now. And I think that the other reason that he still continues to challenge me is that at the end of the episode, we were done recording. And I turned off the recorder, and he said, oh, you know how that is? You're talking to someone, and then all of a sudden you think, oh, if only I would have said this. And I said, well, we could just turn the recorder back on. Let's do it. Let's turn it on. And before I could press record, he says, I wanted to tell you about Eric Mazur. And Eric Mazur was the winner of the Minerva Prize. And I'm typing as fast as I can as he's talking, because at that time, I didn't know who Dr. Mazur was. I didn't know about this Minerva Prize. And so I'm just typing, and then, okay. I press record. Tell me about this Manure Prize. And he actually let me say it 3 times, manure. And he says, no, Bonni, it's not manure, it's Minerva. And I felt just so embarrassed, and I had been so nervous to talk with him. I just really respected his work for such a long time. But I took that with me to say that when we are teaching at our best, we have to be vulnerable. That's something that has come up throughout our entire podcasting, that so many people who are the magnificent teachers are not so protected in a cocoon. They don't have this huge wall up. They make mistakes all the time. And what we decided to do was actually to have a manure award for the podcast. So on our 100th episode, we had people call in and tell stories of their own failures in teaching. And then we awarded the first manure award. And that went to Mahafali in Egypt for telling a wonderful story. We plan on doing that again.
Oh, that's great. In your website, there's a lot of blog that you create. And one of our recent entries of your blog is the role of music in your teaching. So that was new for me. I haven't done that in my classes. So could you please explain a little bit what is to introduce music in a classroom?
I should say that there's a researcher who is, I think it's Howard Gardner. I'm not sure about the first name. It's H. Gardner. And he talks about multiple kinds of intelligence. So he was one of the first people to say we have to stop thinking only about IQ, but that there's other ways we can be intelligent. And so I remember about 7 or 8 years ago, I took his intelligence test, and I scored, not so good on spatial intelligence. There were lower ones, but my 100% was on musical intelligence, and I do not teach anything to do with music. But I love music. I have a soundtrack that plays in my head almost all of my days. And it's fun because I can connect with my students through music. And I have a very eclectic taste in music. And sometimes I can introduce them to songs they've never heard of before, but they like it. And many times they'll introduce me to music I've never heard before, and we can enjoy that together. And to me, it's just one of the ways to bring down the wall a little bit so we can connect. It's just one way. It's not like we can't be doing other things or shouldn't be doing other things. But I'll sometimes sit in the back of the class before we actually start, and there's music playing, and it just makes it a little bit easier to talk. And then also if the class is getting a little bit too not on focus, then I'll play something a little bit more peaceful, a little bit more calming, and help them try to focus a little bit.
So that's a non-traditional approach. It's not common to a professor to play some music in a classroom. So what other non-traditional approaches do you usually use in the classroom, either for teaching or for assessment?
I was going to mention that it may not be traditional, but I can still remember I was in college in the late 80s, early 90s, and there was a history professor who used to play Paul Simon. And I didn't at the time know very much about the apartheid in South Africa, but I wish I had known more then, but the little bit that I did know was through music. Because I did connect so much with the music, that's the pieces where I wanted to know more about the songs and the man who wrote the songs and what he was trying to say through his music. So it's something that I was able to take from a great teacher of mine when I was in college. Other things that I try to do around assessment that is really coming up from a lot of the guests that I've had on my podcast. One is to allow students to choose to a certain extent how they're going to earn their points. And so I call it choose your own adventure assessment. And there are some things that are required because I want to make sure that I'm assessing for the learning outcomes. But once those basic things are covered and I know we've at least assessed around the key things, then they get to choose. Would you rather give presentations? Would you like to do a more extensive research project? Do you want to take more tests? Do you want to write a paper? They have lots of different ways that they can demonstrate their learning. And students, I've only done it now twice because it's a class I only teach once a year, but they have absolutely loved it. And I still was able to assess the way that I wanted to with the kinds of focus on making sure that we did what we needed to do through that class. So that's one of the things I think of. There's actually a more, even probably more advanced and well thought out called specs grading, specifications grading, where students decide, do you want to earn an A or a B or a C? And then they just have to produce whatever work. It's basically at a pass or fail level.
Okay.
And so Linda Nielsen was on the show about specifications grading, but it also has come up a lot just in the community. I know she wrote a book on it. It's not something I've tried. I think that's one of the things when you listen to a podcast like this one, we kind of have to be good about, we can't chase after every idea, just listening and then finding one that really resonates and trying one, and not even just once. We have to try it more than once because the first time it might not go well, but be committed to that kind of thing. And that's what's been fun about growing this community, because there's all these people I get to talk to on a weekly basis to share how they're doing with what they're learning.
I appreciate your time, Bonni, because your podcast is such a contribution to the teaching community, not only in the United States, but all the people around the world and America. And here in Puerto Rico, there are some colleagues that have listened to your podcast, and I want more people, more professors here in Puerto Rico and in Latin America to listen to you, because you have such a charisma and empowerment, and it's very natural, your podcast, and you learn a lot with all the important speakers that come to your podcast. So I really appreciate taking your time from your agenda and come and talk with me virtually here in Utopística.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor, and I'm looking forward to getting to watch it myself and see what it was I said. And I just really appreciate your thoughtful questions and the chance to connect, and I hope people will consider listening.
Yes, one thing before we finish, how people can subscribe to your podcast and get weekly updates?
If someone has a smartphone, that's usually the best way to subscribe to a podcast, because then we can take it with us. You can just go to teachingandhighered.com and listen right on the website, but then you're stuck at your computer. If you use an iPhone, they have a podcast app that's already there. It gets installed automatically, so you just have to find it, podcasts, and then you click the plus button and search for teaching in higher ed, and you add it, and it starts coming in every week. You can go back to older episodes if you want to as well and listen to older episodes. And then if you have another type of a device, it's a smartphone, but it's maybe an Android, there is the Google Play it's on that feed as well. So you can go to Google Play, Google Music. And then there's even websites like Stitcher. There's an app for Stitcher Radio, and there's all different kinds of ways of listening. If you just search for podcast app and find one that looks good to you, you'll be able to subscribe.
Perfect. And thank you, Bonni, for taking your time to talk with me. We wish you the best with your projects and your podcast, and thank you again.
Thanks. I can't wait to hear how it goes playing the Heads Up game this week. You'll have to let me know.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hemos llegado al final de nuestro programa hoy en Utopística. Espero hayan disfrutado de este nuevo formato y esperamos contar con más episodios de este estilo. Recuerden que pueden revisar los podcasts en nuestra página web www.utopística.com. Que estén bien.